Thanks everyone for being with us today for the second of the three workshops on the philosophical life. This one focusing on philosophy beyond the academy. It's been a wonderful day's discussion. Thank you to everyone who's presented so far. Many common themes have come through the talks that we've had today. Perhaps one place we could start would be philosophy becoming cool. Not just philosophy becoming cool, but philosophy becoming cool in order to be more approachable to mass media, to become something desirable for people to engage in, particularly for political reasons. That's something a couple of people have mentioned. What are we thinking about the coolness or the media friendliness of philosophy as a discipline?
Well, in principle, it could certainly become cool, but not the kind of analytic philosophy that is being currently conducted in universities, because in my view, it's not about anything. It's about a realm of, or a small amount of it might be about something, but the vast majority of it, especially the sort the last speaker was defending and praising, is about a fictitious realm of artificial concepts, which look a bit like the concepts we're interested in, but are not. They're retooled so that they're logically tractable. So something like that can't become cool, not because it's too analytic and it's too demanding and it's too dry, but because it's not about anything. Something which doesn't have a point, should not. Well, sometimes things that don't have a point can be interesting, like Scrabble or something. But the combination of the dryness, the artificiality, and we should also mention the character of philosophy departments at the moment, the overwhelming male dominance, the overwhelming class structure of them. No, this cannot become cool.
In some ways, but Richard Marshall was talking about philosophy as an autonomous pursuit that might become cool, that people should be attracted to just because it was a thing that was good to do in itself.
If it was transformed out of all recognition of how it actually is, it could certainly become cool.
But when Ben McPherson was speaking to us this morning, I think he wanted intellectualism to be cool, but I think that was with a particular social and political goal in mind. Those are two slightly different things. To want philosophy to be attractive just because it's something which is valuable in and for itself, or wanting philosophy to be attractive because that might make better informed citizens, more responsible debaters, and so on. It seemed to me that they had slightly different views about why philosophy ought to,
But I think what makes something cool, what makes music cool or art cool, is that sense that not following the herd, being completely content to plough a different furrow. But actually other people, in listening to that music or seeing that art or reading that short story or engaging with that philosophical article, realising that not only is that a new perspective, not only is that different and non-standard, but it actually says something important or touches the heart in a new way that matters. And to me that's the essence of cool, that it is both engaged and surprising. And I think philosophy can do that.
Yeah, I think it has to affect your life in some way, and that's similar to the problem religion has. Once it stops affecting your life in some way, then it's very difficult for people to engage with it at all. So if you read, evolutionary biology sounds dry as dust, but if you read The Selfish Gene, it could change your life. So Richard Dawkins sells a lot of books, and evolutionary biologists sell a lot of books, far more than any theologian or philosopher. And similarly, if you read Tom Devine, then his history is going to change the way you think about yourself in relation to your country at a time when political history is very relevant. Then that has a big effect. So it has to relate directly to you in the same way as if you want, you listen to Leonard Cohen when you're 18. He's going to be your greatest philosopher, because it affects you. It affects your life. And if it doesn't affect your life, doesn't speak directly to you, then it's not going to. So philosophy has to find a way of doing that, as does religion as well, as does theology, which no longer does. It used to, but not anymore.
Some philosophy is cool, right? Zizek and Derrida and Baudrillard and these people are cool, and Sartre and Camus and so forth. used to be cool. I don't know if they're cool anymore. So, I mean, it's not a problem with philosophy as such being cool or uncool. It's something about the idiom in which, it's done in Anglophone philosophy departments. That's the problem. It's not a problem with philosophy as such. I see it as a problem of, as I say, of idiom, of the language, the argument styles and so forth, the rhetoric that is, that we teach our students to adopt, and we've been taught to adopt and so forth. I see that's the problem. But you presumably see it differently.
Yes, I kind of agree with our speaker on Skype that, I've had tremendous difficulty finding any introductory level books in philosophy that are sort of accurate about philosophy. It does seem to be that when people try to make philosophy accessible, they also lose what is perhaps almost the most philosophical part of philosophy. So, because they try to make it easy, and it isn't easy, and I think that's one of the big things. So I'm wondering, I'm beginning to puzzle this out, that what Richard was discussing was making the actual dry analytic stuff that's done in universities cool, not something else.
No, but the question is not difficulty, because Derrida is pretty difficult, and so is Heidegger and all the other cool philosophers. And
You think Heidegger's cool?
Well, maybe Heidegger's a bad choice these days. But anyway, that tradition is not easy. On the contrary, it's extremely difficult, just as difficult, but in a different kind of way from Williamson and Kripke and whoever. The coolness is to do with something other than difficulty or lack of. It's I don't really know how to explain it, but
I think it's to do with whether it's about anything. Just to harp back on my point, I've just finished proofreading a very long text, and if there's one thing that could make me feel positively disposed towards analytic philosophy, it was this. It was a challenging text. It was meant to be about something, though. You could see in the distance it was meant to be talking about something which was real. It should be interesting. It's just that it was overlaid with this absolute verbiage and just empty sentences. Whereas you've got it's a polar opposite to analytic philosophy. There you've got extremely precise sentences, but the starting point is vacuous because these are fictitious entities. There aren't any propositions. There are no concepts. There are no thoughts. There are no mental states. These are all invented things that we invented for ourselves so that we can make a lot of progress really fast. But we're making progress on nothing. So the two things, I think, have the same value. It's just that they are polar images of each other. So
I wouldn't self-identify as an analytic philosopher, but I find it hard to let that go because, let's just think about what analytic or Anglo-American political philosophers are doing. They're thinking about the nature of justice and the nature of political obligation and exactly what our political obligations are and what their limits are, and what the nature of the basis of our allegiance to the state is. That's not. You may not like the language, and it is technical and perhaps over technical at times, but it's not about nothing.
But that was the minority pursuit of philosophy where I did my PhD. There were political philosophers, but they were not considered to be very important, not even considered to be proper philosophers. The proper philosophers were the ones who were thinking about epistemic warrant and thinking of dispositions. That is still the vast majority of what goes on in philosophy, as far as I'm aware. It may have changed. It's been a long time.
Well, I think one thing that comes across is when you read journal articles, as you evidently had to do in your recent employment. They're very much set up. But they're not. I think this is a bad thing. But they're not written to make clear to anybody who's not already interested in that topic why you should be interested. Right? It's assumed. If you picked up this article, it's because you're already embedded in this, and so here's the next step along. But I think that is partly to do with the nature of how a journal article works. Books are not always as bad as that, right? So like epistemic warrant, right? We all want to know what we should believe, what's a good reason to believe something, what's a bad reason for believing something. And I'm not saying every book in epistemology motivates it well, but it's it's not that difficult, I think, to motivate some of those discussions.
And that problem of it being impenetrable to non-experts is going to be the case with any scientific journal, in fact probably any academic journal.
It's not that it's impenetrable, it's that it's supplanted the actual thing of interest with something which is much more tractable, but it's thereby fictitious. Now, that's my position. I don't want to keep on harping on about it.
It's just another topic that's maybe come up during the day's discussion is the kind of there seem to be moments for philosophy. James was talking about moments, perhaps particularly challenging or conflicting moments in the history of a church or for a particular congregation. It strikes me that Katherine's work with young people is often catching people at a kind of philosophical moment in any particular life history. But both Bens who spoke this morning talked about the early part of this century, this millennium, as a moment which was particularly vital for philosophy, because there were things like the invasion of Iraq, which seemed to push a whole set of moral and international political concerns very much to the forefront of our minds. I wonder if sometimes philosophy needs to have its moment. It needs for there to be some kind of time in our lives, or time in the life of society, for philosophy to seem important, for which pushes us towards philosophical pursuits, philosophical questions, and sometimes philosophical answers. But
I don't know if this relates directly, but it did strike me thinking about the Enlightenment philosophers particularly, and that was the last seminar, that the role that philosophy would have played in looking at society's problems, at politics, at issues, is simply now taken over by psychology. And that we've and so that same role, well, pop psychology even worse really, and sociology to some extent. Although, I think as somebody was pointing out earlier, the issues and the questions really are philosophical. I think I'm going back to Richard again. Yes, why have they got a literary expert in or a scientist to answer a philosophical question? So it's as though it's just simply not known that this is philosophy and it should be answered philosophically.
Certainly there are battle lines between neuroscience and philosophers of consciousness, I think. And where it gets interesting is when people are actually open to both disciplines, I think, rather than being in one pigeonhole and saying, well, there's nothing interesting coming out of you. But there needs to be humility there too, doesn't there? And to realise that I think that philosophy must work with science. And in terms of moments, the most interesting comment in terms of the contemporary moment is the idea that tech guys are worried about transhumanism. And actually transhumanism was one of the topics that came up in Thinking Aloud, the discussion group I do, which talks about this singularity of a moment of which humanity will as it were, supersede the existing limitations of humanity. And that could be through implantation of computer technology or various other things. It could be through improved physical performance, or it could be cell engineering and so on, so that we can deprogram cell death such that we don't die. These are the things that actually, when science and technology changes, when you get a paradigm shift, right? Yeah? Good scientific, good philosophical term. Isn't that when there's a philosophical moment? Because suddenly we're at sea, and we can't leave it to the tech people because they don't have philosophical underpinnings, and because it's a category mistake to think that because we understood, for example, that Homo sapiens, like all species, come from a common origin. So it's a category mistake to think, well, therefore all ethical questions can be solved by the biologists. So I think when science and technology have a new understanding, that's the philosophical moment.
But presumably there are two different kinds of philosophical moments. There's the moment when philosophy kind of internally suddenly realises that something it's got to sort out, and a whole bunch of professional philosophers realise that the questions have changed, or which questions are important changes. But the other, I guess what Tom was getting at also was sort of philosophy in the wider culture suddenly becomes important, and I suppose it would be interesting to know whether sort of changes in technology are making philosophical problems seem more relevant in the wider culture? Or?
Well, stem cell research would be an example. Aren't philosophers interested in those questions?
Sure, but I guess the question is, yes, they are, but is that interest sort of echoed in the wider public?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think both Ashley and James were.
Just a brief note that when stem cell research and related topics have come up, we have occasionally heard from Mary Warnock. I suppose I'm thinking back a few years there, but she's definitely a philosopher who's managed to engage with the public and sound good doing so. A bit of a rarity, I feel that there should be more such occasions, but it was a sort of hopeful occasion.
So what are philosophers trying to do in these philosophical moments? What are philosophers trying to do? What are they when they're in the room at that moment? Are they trying to be let's say it's stem cell research at the Iraq War? Are they trying to be the expert in the room, or are they trying to encourage the experts to leave the room at that moment in order so that philosophers can help people to think for themselves? So when the experts come back in the room, people are more likely to be able to assess the arguments and think about it more broadly. So what is the philosopher doing at that moment? I think is maybe the question you have to.
Well, the philosopher is making you see how hard a question is and keeping that question open for as long as possible. It's certainly not an expert who's giving you the answer. So
yeah,
that's how I would answer.
I was going to disagree slightly with something that's been said. Certainly the work that I do is to find the philosophical in anything and everything, in everyday things. It doesn't need something special or a special set of circumstances. But then I sometimes wonder whether what I do is philosophy at all. In fact, I don't call it philosophy. I call it philosophical thinking or philosophical inquiry, because yes, it's opening up questions, but professional philosophers also give answers. That's what they do. And your answer is different from your answer or your answer, but you do provisional ones, like scientists, but they do actually make a case for something.
Some philosophers.
Just to come back to the moments thought, I think we're at such a moment, right? We're not, perhaps not specifically for philosophy, but for academic expertise and maybe the humanities and social sciences more generally, with the US election and the Brexit and other things that are going on in the world. You see more and more, I think, discussion in public of ideas around reasoning and evidence and and expertise and what's the value of that. So it seems like that's a moment of another kind where there seems to be both a demand and maybe an opportunity. I don't know how to meet that, but there seems to be an occasion where something like that is happening.
What's the role of philosophy in the post-truth world?
Well,
Oh, please.
Recovering truth, I would hope.
which actually connects something to what James was pointing to, and it seems to me a thing that's come up several times was this kind of two ways in which philosophy can be useful in the world. So one is this kind of as sort of thinking skills, as it were, helping people to think for themselves and to reason about it and so on. And that does seem somewhat different from the other thing that philosophy might do, or philosophers might do, which is to think much more carefully about stem cell research or whatever or justice, whatever the issue of the day might be, and maybe different sorts of programs are going to serve different needs, or different people are going to be better suited to different kinds of work there. It's not clear to me which of those is most needed at the moment, but I mean, I think hopefully both.
I think James's point about keeping difficult questions open for as long as possible and retaining their difficulty as long as possible will maybe keep the rest of these questions open. And just like to thank you all for taking part in this discussion and for the whole day.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you.